Experts from various fields have met at Warsaw University of Technology at the 3Cs Generation Freedom Future Leaders Conference. And with me now to talk about President Volodymyr Zelensky's trip to Washington, D.C. is Mr. Sergej Sumlenny, Director at the European Resilience Initiative Center. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you for having invited me today.
So, President Volodymyr Zelensky's trip to Washington comes amid a trying time for his alliance with the United States as Republican leaders in Congress, they are discussing on how to send more military and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. What next? What kind of steps do you think we can expect from the United States?
Well, the current situation with the U.S. support for Ukraine is pretty unfortunate. Like we know that the U.S. is, in absolute numbers, is the biggest supplier of weapons to Ukraine and of some essential weapons like the HIMARS artillery systems or recently the artillery shells with the cluster munition, which are extremely important for the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And this discussion within the U.S. politics, should the U.S. continue to supply weapons or should it stop, can have very bad consequences for the counteroffensive and also encourage Vladimir Putin in Russia and even European forces who are pro-Russian to increase the pressure on Ukraine. At the same time, when we see like what it's all about, like currently $100 billion package is being under discussion in the US. Is it much or not? For the US numbers, it is nothing. Also, when we think that most of this money goes directly into the US companies which produce weapons, and Ukraine doesn't get the most modern equipment, Ukraine gets what US has on stock, mostly outdated equipment which US is ready to deliver to a non-NATO country, like without any military secrets, without any classified devices. So the US practically gives away to Ukraine what the US doesn't need, what the US has in stock. And to replace this stock, the US invests a lot of money into its own production, boosting its economy and paying salaries to the workers. But of course, for the Republicans, it is a good opportunity to attack Joe Biden personally and the Democrats, saying, look, the US president neglects its own citizens and provides support to a country which, as the Republicans say, cannot win this war. Though that is also not true, as we can discuss it later.
So now, do you think this difference in approach, is it worth supporting Ukraine or not? Do you think this may cause a stalemate that could easily delay future rounds of American help for Ukraine?
Well, it is, of course, it already produces delays. We know that Ukraine is in need of ATACMS missiles, which can be used in combination with HIMARS launching systems and can hit the Russian positions at a distance of up to 300 kilometers. So why ATACMS are needed? Because the Russians try to disperse its logistics to save it from Ukrainian attacks. The Russians bring their command HQs, headquarters, far away from the front line, also have airfields, etc. So the Ukrainians need to be able to hit these high-value targets, including bridges, including logistic nodes. They already use for that the Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles, provided respectively by the United Kingdom and France, but high-value targets, even if they hit, they don't disappear forever. They can be rebuilt, replaced, and it is an ongoing process. You need to have a constant supply of missiles to hit them. So the US actually would have sent them if not this discussion and this fear that Russia will collapse maybe or the Republicans will be angry. So look at what happened. The moment when Zelenskyy comes to the US, and we know that ATACMS will be on the discussion, the New York Times published a very strange article saying that it could be, or it was, or they suspect it was a Ukrainian missile which hit a Ukrainian city of Konstantinivka by mistake, causing death of 12 people. They don't have proofs for that, they have allegations, and we know that the New York Times had a long story of accusations against Ukraine of having caused death to their own citizens, starting with MH17 when New York Times reported that according to the witnesses, it was Ukraine who shot down MH17. We know now it was not true. And the different stories of that kind. But the public in the US gets informed, look, the Ukrainians may not be trusted with high-tech weapons. If we give them missiles of that range and of that like destructive power, they maybe will be not able to deal with that. Maybe it will cause death. So let's be like calm, let's calm down, let's continue business as we had it, but don't increase the stakes. And that is, after all, that is a very unfortunate, because the Ukrainians need more weapons now to advance. And we know that they achieve results on the battlefield around Robotyno in the direction of Verbove, but they need more weapons to strike Russians deeper, because what we have now is the advance of the offensive of a very slow pace, and we need to increase this pace to let Ukrainians liberate as much more territories until they have good weather, not to be forced to fight in mud, in cold, amid snow.
So now you mentioned public opinion in the US. So do you think that maybe this shifting public support makes Ukraine funding risky for US lawmakers? And also, according to a CNN poll, a majority of Americans are opposed to authorizing more funding for Ukraine. And among Republicans, the number of those opposing soars to 71%. So now, how important is this mood among the public?
Of course it's important, and it's not new. If you look at the history of the World War II, you will see that we had the absolutely same discussion within the US in 1940-41. It was the pacifist demonstrations in New York, like saying like Hitler has not attacked the US, why we attack Hitler, delivering weapons is prolonging war, don't deliver weapons, don't add fuel to this war. If you take these slogans, you could easily see them today in the Republicans' charts or at Fox News or somewhere else. And the same discussion was, should the US give money to the UK? Like, should the US be more reluctant? Because the UK cannot win this war, it's a stalemate, like Hitler's Luftwaffe continued to attack London. It is actually the war which is not in interest of anyone. And if you look further, it was absolutely the same discussion. The Ford Motor Company had their investments in Germany, and the General Motors had the Opel subsidiary in Germany. The moment when the US troops in 1944 entered the territory of the Nazi Reich, the US soldiers were shocked how much of GM and Ford equipment was used by the Nazis. Of course, all these companies were confiscated by the Nazis and used like for the Reich, but the primary investments, they have been done by the US companies. It was absolutely the same discussion. Should we have the business as usual? Should we stay away from this European war? It's far away, it's on another side of the Atlantic Ocean. We don't need this war. And now we have the same. Important is that the situation in Ukraine has a direct relations to their security. And if Russia prevails on the Ukrainian soil, it will not stop. And it will continue to attack the US further, meddling into the election, challenging the US on the battlefield in other countries. China will be inspired. Like, what will happen when China will see, okay, Russia has held like for 2 years and won this war, or at least like got advantages. Let's do the same with Taiwan. The US is weak, the US will not intervene. It will be, after all, it will mean either a collapse of the US-dominated world order, which is not good for the US, or even cause death of the US soldiers, because they will have to fight on one front or another in 5 years and 10 years. That is what the Republicans don't understand or don't want to understand, and that is how they endanger the US itself with this cheap talk.
So now, what do you think if, let's say, since the American presidential elections are coming up in about a year, what do you think might happen, let's say, if we do have a change in the White House and we will have a Republican president? What would that mean in terms of further help for Ukraine? And then to take it a step further, because like you also mentioned China now, right, which is watching, what might that mean for the potential world order?
Well, I would say if we have a US president, the next one, who will say, we don't support Ukraine anymore, it's not our war, they should do it on their own, it would be extremely unfortunate. It would mean actually a capitulation of the leader of the free world, the US. And Ukrainians and other Europeans will need to deal with this war on their own. Can we do it? Yes, I think so. The United Europe has enough war power to deal with this war, and Russia is already very weak. If we look at the Russian casualties, the Russian mobilized people, statistically, 20% of them die within 2 months on the front, 50% of them die within 5 months on the front. We know that the Russian Ministry of Defense has already ordered 230,000 death certificates, which is actually very similar to the numbers the Ukrainians deliver. And Russia is not capable to make any offensive. What Russia is capable for, they can increase the number of landmines. They can try to slow down the Ukrainian offensive as much as possible. And if we stop supporting Ukraine, if Ukraine will not have enough power to advance, then the Russians will just try to freeze it for 1 year, for 2 years, to create new alliances with China, maybe to provide China with some territories in exchange or some promises to get the equipment and to attack again. So we will have to face this war again in a worse situation. So that's why for Ukraine, also for Poland, of course, for the Baltic states, they are all on the front line. They are the next targets practically. It is important to continue supporting Ukraine and continue to fight this war, because with the US or without the US, all these nations are in crosshair of Russian military plans. And Russians don't hide these plans. They talk openly about it. So I think the lack of the US support would be extremely unfortunate, but with the strong and decisive military alliance, especially in Central Europe, it will not mean the end. This war can be won even without the US, but of course with the much higher price.
And on that note, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for sharing your insight here for us on TVP World.
Thank you so much.
And that was Mr. Sergej Sumlenny, Director at the European Resilience Initiative Center. Thank you for watching.